Okay. Hi, Dr. Meg. Welcome to the Genetic Genius podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, thanks for being a guest. I'm super excited today to talk to you about hormones and women's health. We're going to have so much fun. One of my favorite topics.
Yeah, mine
Mhm.
too. So I'm glad.
Great. Well, before we dive in, can you just talk to the listeners about who you are and what you do and what's your impact on the planet right now?
Great question. So I'm a naturopathic doctor, just like you. I received my training up at Bastyr, also
Mm-hmm.
like you. So we come from the same school, which I think was just a great experience. And I treat a lot of different types of women. Women, adolescent women, all the way up to 60, 65. But most of my patients are in that, 25 to 55 range.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really fun group to work with. And I find that I'm really passionate about women's health, like all aspects of it, the hormones, the gut piece, the environmental piece, pretty much everything that affects our lives as women, I tend to get really excited about. Um,
Mm-hmm.
just because I feel like there's so many symptoms that people come to me with that get really dismissed in the conventional system.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to get like super uppity about certain topics like, bioidentical hormones and menopause and peri-menopause and what's happening in your body and things like getting off of the birth control pill.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I've been really passionate about lately is, how do we establish healthy periods from the beginning
Mm-hmm.
for women who are, just starting to cycle? I get a lot
Mm-hmm.
of questions about that. Natural forms of birth control, just kind of everything in that realm is something that I just could talk for hours about.
Oh, great, good. And what's kind of your background about why you wanted to become a naturopathic physician?
Hmm. So, very, very long story short, I grew up in a small town in New Hampshire, and
Mm-hmm.
we were very, very fortunate to have amazing, brilliant naturopath there, Steve Clark. I don't know if you know him, but he really helped me at the beginning with some issues that I had that the conventional system just couldn't help me with. I was overweight at the time. I was having some energy issues. I was having some skin issues, and I remember like meeting with him for the first time with my mom because I was
Mm-hmm.
about 12 or 13 at the time, and he just looked at me and he was like, "You need to stop eating gluten." And my mom and I looked at each other and we just said, "Oh my gosh, what is that?" And it was a fun journey because around that time, my mom was starting to educate herself in nutrition, and she was trying to change our diets for us and improve
Mm-hmm.
them. And my brother is 3 years older than I am, and he and I were very resistant to it. Um, but I ended up working with other naturopaths over the years, and they totally cleared up my skin issues. They found out that yes, gluten was the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Many things, worked on digestive issues. So the short answer is that when I was with those doctors, I was just really fascinated by their brain, quite literally.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know all of that stuff? How can you know the physiology and the biochemistry so deeply, and then just, explain to me why I need an elimination diet, or why I need to go on this medication, or why I need to try this herb? I just remember sitting there as, like 13 to 16-year-old thinking, whoa, that is so cool. And I did it and I got better, you know? So
Yeah,
it was very tangible for me at the
right.
time. And I'd always loved science too. So um, it was never a career path that I intended to go through. My undergraduate background is in human biology,
Mm-hmm.
but I always assumed I was going to do nutrition or something similar because I'm a big foodie. I love food. I love to cook. But when I was starting to graduate college, that's when I was like, oh crap. And, what do I do? And I had an advisor at the time who was an MD, and he was a
Mm-hmm.
professor at my school. And he said to me, what do you want to do every single day for the rest of your life?
Mm.
And that was really a big question for me at the time, because I was already talking to people, like I was a nutritionist, with all the
Mm-hmm.
self-research that I had done, with everything that I had learned through my journey in the conventional system, with everything that I had learned from the naturopaths. I was like, oh, this is how you help absorb iron. And, oh, this is,
Mm.
how you can get your period back. And, this is this exercise. I was just super into
Right.
everything. And I just said to myself, oh, I need to go be a naturopath. And that was spring of my senior year of college. And I applied in 2 weeks, got all my acceptances, did all my in-person interviews, and then was at Bastyr in July.
Wow.
So yeah, it was
Yeah.
it was a fun journey looking back, but it was insane. Like I feel for my parents because they were like, "What's happening? You're going to
Yeah.
naturopathic medical school?
You're like, where's that? What is
Where's
that?
Yeah, and thankfully my family is very supportive. But yeah, it was just a knowledge thing for me. I was just so
Mm.
fascinated, and
Hmm.
I realized that I wanted to do that for other people.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Yeah.
so true. I love, there's so many of us as naturopathic doctors that have that story kind of ingrained with our journey to help our patients, because that's how we learn to help others. It's through our own journey. And such a beautiful story. I just love how you were touched by all these like little sparkles of joy along the way. And you're like, yes, I'll
Yeah.
take that. I'll take some of that. Oh, great. So today we're going to be focusing a lot on women's health and especially hormones, and I can't wait to dive in. I'm so excited.
Mhm.
Can we first talk about kind of like the different stages or changes of hormonal of women's hormones, sorry. So for instance, like, what are those stages and how do we transition? Just like the basics so we can lay that foundation for the listeners.
Yeah. So this is a talk I actually do really commonly in the area,
Oh, great.
where I love how you say stage, because one thing that I often try to teach women is that our hormones are different in every stage, and we can't eat the same way, exercise the same way, interact with our environments the same way in every decade.
Mm,
Because your hormones are going to be different when you're a young girl getting your period at 11, 12, 13, depending on where you start. That's going to be different from your early 20s, also your later 20s, and your 30s and your 40s and your 50s and your 60s, and then beyond.
mhm,
So um, I think the place to start would be puberty, of course.
mhm.
That is the time when women, quote, quote, come into their hormones. It's essentially
Right.
when your body starts to make hormones
Mhm.
at a much higher level. What happens is that the brain, the brain is very smart and programmed, and it um, starts to send signals to the ovaries.
Mhm.
And these signals communicate with the ovaries, and they create this really nice feedback loop that I often talk to my patients about, because it's really important. We have to have communication between different parts of the body to get things to work.
Right.
So,
Communication is key.
exactly. So, your brain, in that age group, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, depending on when you start your period, which is
Mhm.
different for every girl, your brain says to your ovaries, hi, please turn on, please work,
Right.
please
Start
start making
working.
hormones, start
Mhm.
working, wake up, you've been quiet, for most of your life. And we do have hormones when we are younger than that
Mhm.
age, but it's not in the same amount that
Right.
happens in puberty. Because what also happens with puberty is the onset of menses. We get our
Mhm.
period.
Mhm.
And so that's what the brain is trying to do in that time. It's trying to say, hey, ovaries, like, please, like, make a menstrual cycle.
Right.
But your ovaries are like, okay, like, what does that mean? Can you send the signal again? Like, it's like a game of telephone,
Right,
with
totally.
the hand and the string. And
Mhm.
the brain is like, oh, dang it. Okay, I'll go back in my email and I'll send it again. And like, pick up the phone, pick up the phone.
Answer my messages.
Answer my messages. Yeah. And the reason why I explain it like that is because these feedback loops, these communication loops need to be established
Mm-hmm.
in order for hormone production to happen via the ovaries, and in order for us to actually start having a menstrual cycle, which would be, like first onset of bleeding,
Mm-hmm.
that first period that we all get, which is
Right.
always
The first one.
first one. Um, and then what has to happen is that the periods, our menses have to get regular. They
Mm-hmm.
have to fall into a rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is that it takes some time for these loops to establish, the communication signals to be, really smooth.
Mm-hmm.
So
Bumps in
what's
the
really,
road.
yeah, there's so many bumps in the road because
Mm-hmm.
the ovaries are waking up from their sleep and they're saying, wow, okay, I have a job to do,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm new at this job, so I don't know how to, do this perfectly. And so
Right.
when young women get their periods, there's usually a certain period of time where your periods are all over the place.
Right.
You're having heavy periods, light periods, periods that are 60 days apart, periods that are right on the dot 28 days, like a textbook.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Um, Periods where you have no PMS, periods where you have an insane amount of PMS. And that's just because the ovaries are learning a new rhythm.
Mm.
But women can have irregular cycles, like 1 to 3 years from the start of menses. So
Mm-hmm.
this is unfortunately the time when, you know, women tend to start thinking about their health because they have their period, and they're like, oh no, my period is not regular. This is a problem. I'm going to go to my doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually when the gynecologist, typically, or their primary care provider says, oh yeah, your periods are irregular. Let's give you a birth control pill, or let's give
Right. We're
you,
just starting. Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah, or like, let's give you some other solution.
Mm-hmm.
And what they don't know is that the feedback loops take some time.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you get your period at 13, by the time you're 16-ish, give or take,
Mm-hmm.
depending on your own physiology, that's when things should start to be more regular. You're getting a cycle each month, whether that's every 26 days or every 34 days or every 30 days. Doesn't really matter because we're all wired differently. But, it should be coming at a regular interval that's about a month, give or take a few days.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes some time to establish.
Right. Getting into that rhythm takes a little time for your body to figure things out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's not, there's not anything wrong with you if your period is not regular immediately. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's what I often will counsel young girls about is your body's trying to figure this out. It's never done this before. It's kind of
Right.
like, when you learn to go skiing, or when you learn to swim, you're not
Mm-hmm.
just, instantly an expert at it. You have
Right.
to practice. So that time that the ovaries are getting those first signals, they're practicing. They're like, oh, okay, like I'm gonna make some hormones, and then what do I do next?
Right.
They're in a they're in a different spot. And one part of menstruation is establishment of ovulation.
Mm-hmm.
When we release an egg, and we do that in order to make babies. But regardless of whether we want to make babies or not, ovulation is really important for women because it's
Mm-hmm.
how we make progesterone.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So whether you're 13, we want you to be ovulating. Whether you're 40, we want you to be ovulating. Whether you're 30, we want you to be ovulating. But that takes a lot of establishment as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a big hormonal interplay to actually, have a bleed, and then build up to ovulation, and then to ovulate, and then to have your period of time before your next period. That
Mm-hmm.
takes some time to really establish.
Right. Yeah. Well, great. So it sounds like having those foundations in the beginning, being aware of that your body is learning something new, as when anytime we do, it always takes a little more than one try, right?
Yeah.
So we're moving into, we've established this wonderful rhythm within our life, and now we're moving into, let's say, perimenopause, which I think would be a good place for us to
Sure.
focus, because a lot of our listeners to this podcast are coming for information about that hormonal
Yeah.
stage where things start to get a little bit funky um,
Mhm.
in their lives, so to speak. So can you kind of describe what that perimenopause phase is for our listeners, and then we'll kind of dive a little bit deeper into the subject matter.
Sure. So perimenopause is essentially the reverse of everything I just said. So
Mm-hmm.
puberty is the establishment of the menstrual cycle and ovulation. And perimenopause is when the opposite happens. You start to deconstruct the cycle, if you will. So
Mm-hmm.
what happens there, instead of the ovaries starting to turn on and listen to brain signals, the ovaries are like, thanks for that signal. That was nice. But, I've been working for you for, 30, 40 years, however long it's been.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of sick of listening to you. So, that FSH signal, that LH signal, that's
Mm-hmm.
nice.
I
I'm
think I'll
just going
take
to
a
let it,
nap.
right? I'm just going to take a nap. I'm going to let it blow by, because FSH and LH, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, are the signals that get us to make estrogen, prep an egg, and release an egg.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in perimenopause, uh, the thing about perimenopause is that it brings you to menopause.
Right.
So it's like the transitional time before you reach menopause, and menopause is that 12 months no bleeding.
Mm-hmm.
So most people, when they say, oh, I'm in menopause, they're actually going through perimenopause,
Mm-hmm.
and they're experiencing those symptoms. And so you can imagine, okay, if my ovaries are starting to not work, and that's what perimenopause is, then what's going to change for me? I'm not probably going to be ovulating consistently or at all. So I'm not going to be making progesterone. So I might have difficulty sleeping. I might be more anxious. I might feel less grounded. I might gain a little bit of weight. And estrogen levels are going to fluctuate as well,
Mm-hmm.
depending on how much the ovaries decide to output that month.
Right.
And your ovaries are different. They're not twins, they are sisters. So
Different
they,
sisters who don't always agree.
uh-huh, yeah, and they don't always agree. And sometimes you have one ovary that's healthier than the other, or
Mm-hmm.
more prone to listen to the brain than the other, or more likely to have a great ovulation response than the other. So oftentimes women will tell me in this perimenopausal transition phase, some months are really great, and some months I feel like, I just want to rip everybody's heads off, or I'm really bloated,
Mm-hmm.
or I feel really anxious, or my flow is really, really heavy, or it's really light. And it's because there's differences in how the ovaries operate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that they're communicating with each other, but secretly,
Yeah.
and then learning to communicate, or they've established like great communication with the brain. And
Mhm.
so, okay, so now this transition is happening. So let's talk about kind of what some things that would be major lifestyle factors that would then affect this stage and cause it to become awry or out of balance. Because I think that's like the most common thing people feel. Sometimes they feel nothing as
Okay.
we're in that stage,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And then let's also talk about how to prepare better to be in that stage and moving into the menopause stage.
Yes. So I love this question, because I feel like that is what women in this stage are really curious about, but it's hard to get an exact answer to. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you. We'll talk about
Yay.
so um, when you're in perimenopause, your hormones are shifting. They're downshifting. So if the listeners could hear me right now, I'd be moving my hands in a certain way to kind of show what happens with the hormones. But when you're cycling, you're kind of on a nice regular up and down wave, and
Mm-hmm.
then when you go into perimenopause, you're kind of like an earthquake, up and down, jiggity jaggedy line, but your
Mm-hmm.
hormones are on the downward trend. And then menopause is when you reach kind of a new bottom, or a new baseline that's kind of flat,
Mm-hmm.
and you're transitioning through that up and down phase, so you can have a lot of different symptoms. um, so symptom wise, I mean, you can have different hot flashes. You can have pain with sex. You can feel like your libido is really low. You can feel pretty much any type of PMS in the book is really, really common. But the reason why we have all those symptoms is because our hormones are on that downward trend, because the ovaries stop listening to the brain. And so they're not making as much estrogen. They're not making much progesterone, depending on whether you're still ovulating or not. The way that the hormones are made in your body, they come from the ovaries, so estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, but they're also made by your adrenal glands. And what is really common during this time is the ovaries are shutting down, but then we're then calling on the adrenal glands to make some hormones and kind of
compensate.
Compensate. Yeah. And the way I think about it is it's like the 80-20 rule. So about 80% of your hormones are made by your ovaries before menopause. I always have to say this really slow because I always get it mixed up. So 80% of your hormones are made by your ovaries before menopause, and 20% are made by your adrenal glands. And then when you're going through perimenopause, that's starting to shift. And then when you get into menopause, 80% of your hormones are made by your adrenal glands, 80%, and then 20% are made by your ovaries.
That's a big shift.
If that, yeah, and it's a big shift. And so let's just imagine that you are dealing with a bunch of stress in your life. And most women, by the time they hit their 40s, have done lots of things. They have traveled, they have had careers, they have had babies, multiple babies. They've cared for family members. They've had multiple different jobs. They've worn different hats. They've been through life. And so they have called upon the function of their adrenal glands a lot. So, I don't think I've met a perimenopausal woman that can say that she has not had any sort of stress.
Stress-free is not the word that you hear.
Right. And so the best way to prevent a lot of those symptoms that I was talking about is to actually work on stress management. But the biggest thing along with that is adrenal health. Like, how do we support your adrenal glands so that they can make a healthy amount of hormones? Because the women that have had good stress management and have thought about their adrenal system before they hit perimenopause, those are the women that do better. They have less symptoms. And it's pretty, I know you've worked with these women. It's pretty marked. Like you can tell.
Right, totally.
So it makes a big difference. So if anything, if you're in perimenopause, you need to be thinking about the health of your adrenal glands and stress management. And I feel like that tends to bounce off some people, like, oh, stress management. But I can tell you, it adds up. And it makes a really big difference in symptoms. So if you're perimenopausal and listening to this, believe us when we say, your adrenal glands matter. And so you got to work on them. And so that would be my best way if we're thinking about the root of the issue, going back to basics. That's going to be probably the best way to have the easiest perimenopause transition. And, genetics does play a role, of course, because we all have our own timing with when we go through menopause. That's a little bit genetically determined. So you can ask your mom, if you know your mom, and your aunts and sisters and grandmothers, all the females in your family on your side. When did they stop having their periods? And that can kind of tell you the age range that you might stop your period.
Give you some kind of gauge.
Yeah, and also ask them, like, how is your symptoms? How's the transition for you? Did you get a lot of hot flashes? Did you have any issues in the bedroom? Did you keep your libido? Did you gain any weight? A lot of common symptoms of perimenopause. And that can kind of, give you a little bit of insight to the genetic piece, but then you're responsible for the lifestyle piece. And as you know, I know you talk to your listeners about this all the time, but your lifestyle influences your genetics and how your
Yeah.
genes work for you, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so true. Yeah. And, you know, we can only have so much of an inside microscope looking at our genes. And I liked how you said to talk to your family, talk to your sisters and female relatives about what their transition was like, because that's so key, you know, and we're living in a really different time now, as listeners know, we're in a whole new world.
Mhm.
And so managing that stress, like you said, is so key. It's like the icing on the cake, but we want to be really addressing the cake.
Yep, exactly.
Mhm.
I so agree.
um, okay, great. So it sounds like stress can be a major factor for influencing an imbalance of hormones.
Mhm.
And what about nutrition? So are there specific, like if we're looking at ways, I know you talked about how you're a foodie in the beginning. I love
Yeah.
food too. And so are there specific like foods that can help support the body during this
Mhm.
stage? And then two, like, are there like even specific nutritional plans, like a whole, you know, recommended, you know, there's all kinds of different things now, keto and paleo and blah, blah, blah. Is there a specific one that can help all encompass that, especially
Mhm.
when we're talking about the adrenal glands? I'll let you answer that and then I'll go more.
Sure, sure. Um, so to answer that last part you just mentioned, I really have women focus on a whole foods diet.
Mm.
And uh, whenever I say that, everybody looks at me and they're like, what does whole foods even mean?
Right. What is
And
that?
what is that, you know? And I say it so broadly because this looks different for every single person.
Hmm.
Because we are all genetically different, we have different gut health, we're going to do different, better or worse on different foods than the next person. So, you know, you might do really well on beans, but I might not do well on beans, and you know, different, insert whatever example in there you wish. But that's just one of them. So I always tell people whole foods diet.
Hmm.
And the approach that I probably use the most commonly with patients is, especially if there's any insulin issues or weight gain, obesity that we need to address, or hormonal issues,
Hmm.
um, then I will often recommend that we start with the paleo diet. But I like to call it paleo-ish because not everybody needs to do a full paleo diet. And a paleo diet might be a little bit too restrictive for some people. So the
Right.
paleo diet is essentially just meats and
Mhm.
healthy fats and veggies, but it doesn't allow things like grains, beans, legumes, dairy for most people on the paleo
Mhm.
diet. So uh, we essentially look at people's diet history to determine what they're going to do the best on. And sometimes we do some experimenting, which
Right.
is fun.
Yeah.
But I find that whole foods approach and sometimes a multivitamin will kind of give a broad net of nutrients that your body
Mhm.
can be consistently exposed to and absorb,
Right.
which I think is important. I think it's important for our body to consistently have a wide variety of nutrients to uptake, because you know your gut health changes, and there's almost this internal sense that we have as women in our physiology where your body has like, it's kind of like the nutrient police, where it's constantly like, is she getting enough nutrients, is she getting enough nutrients, and like at
Mhm.
any point it's willing to, you know, either suppress your hormones, mess them up, you know, your
Mm.
reproductive system. If you're running away from the bear and you're super
Right.
stressed out, your reproductive system is not a priority, you know.
Right.
Like if
Save
you're,
yourself.
yeah, save yourself. Yeah. So the way I describe it is, if you're running away from a bear, you're not going to be concerned about making babies.
Right.
Um, so sometimes our body will sense different stressors on a deep physiological level. So I like to make sure that we're really consistently like marinating you in all of the good nutrients as possible.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but that being said, there are specific nutrients that I tend to see women in this age group decently deficient in.
Mhm.
Um, and one of them is just a macronutrient,
Mhm.
protein.
Mhm.
I find that to be something that, for some reason, women have felt like they don't need as much anymore.
Mhm.
They tend to decrease protein as they age, Maybe when you're in your 20s, you eat more protein. And then by the time you're in your late 40s, early 50s, the portion sizes are going down, or the frequency is.
Or you hope so, maybe.
Right. Sometimes appetite goes down a little bit as we age. So I find that women just aren't reaching for the protein, but it's actually one of the most important things, because you need protein to keep your muscle mass, to keep, your metabolism up, to age better, have healthy hair, skin, nails, so many different things. And like we were talking about stress before, I find a lot of perimenopausal women to be very depleted. And so I often will have people that have come in on a long-term vegetarian or vegan diet that I don't like to knock those diets, because they work really well for some people when properly done. But a lot of the women that I work with don't tend to, really utilize the strengths of those diets. So, sometimes I actually sit them down and I say, okay, how would you feel adding in fish, or adding in more eggs, or having a piece of red meat once a week, something like that. And I find that to be really important, because one part of keeping our adrenals healthy is also having healthy blood sugar.
Right, totally.
So,
balancing the cortisol and the blood sugar is so key.
Exactly. And so if you're eating, non-animal sources of protein, you're typically getting a lot of carbohydrates along with that protein. And so the bioavailability of the protein goes down. And the ratio between protein and carbs, it's hard to get a higher protein ratio and a lower carb ratio. But so protein, I always harp on.
Okay, protein.
I gotta get some water here.
Yeah, no, that's good. And while you're drinking, I'll just say, yeah, the protein is so key, like you said, for that anti-aging piece, because we use those amino acids for so many aspects of our brain function. And as we age, our brain, not like it slows down, but it needs more help to be functioning with the amount that we're asking it to do. I feel like sometimes with the stress around us.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point about the brain, because the brain is also made up of a bunch of fat.
Fat.
So we need protein and fat for our brains to function well. We need protein and fat for our blood sugar to be balanced, so our adrenals can take a little bit of a siesta and they can not be so overworked. But we also need fat to make healthy hormones, because fat is the backbone of a lot of hormones.
Yeah, so key when people are like, oh, I have my cholesterol is really low. And I'm like, well, maybe we should think about adding some more fat into your diet to help your hormones.
Exactly. And that adrenal piece for the fat support, fat support adrenal health, that's a big thing. And so, protein, fat, and the thing that I wanted to kind of segue into when you said brain is, our brain function does change a little bit as we age, but it gets really affected in perimenopause when our hormones are shifting, because the brain, when we're having fluctuations in estrogen, specifically, and progesterone, we can be more foggy brained, we can be more anxious, we can be more depressed, because when your estrogen and progesterone fluctuate, they also affect things like your dopamine and your serotonin. And so I find a lot of perimenopausal women to have a lot of brain fog as well. And sometimes that's just because their estrogen has just come down way too quickly and we need to support them. So I love that you brought up the brain, because, if you can imagine being in perimenopause and having a foggy brain, and you're stressed and you're getting hot flashes, all bets are off.
Right.
Like,
Yeah. That
oh,
makes a cranky person.
yeah, cranky, exactly.
Yeah. Not a
But
good place to be, which is, I think, why a lot of people are probably listening now and then realizing this is what's happening in their life. And
yeah,
sometimes you can't see the outside view, you've all the little things you just said are the little pieces. And they're like, oh, well, all these fit together. And then you never realize it until it's like the puzzle's there in front of you, like opened up.
yeah, yeah. And that's why I like to explain it so in depth so people understand, oh, I'm brain foggy because of this physiological imbalance,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily that I'm fueling poorly or I'm overtraining or I'm too stressed at work. I could
Mm-hmm.
just be a little bit deficient in estrogen. That
Right.
drop could be a little bit too much. So
Mm-hmm.
I like to explain this because I want women to get it and I want them to realize, like, you can get help from this.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to
Yeah.
feel.
Right. It's so empowering. I
Mhm.
think as one of the things as naturopathic doctors, we really love doing is teaching our patients about their health, because when you know about how your body's functioning, it's like empowers you to be able to help yourself so much more instead of just being, a lot of times we don't think about how the brain is working or how our gut's working or how our adrenal glands are working,
Mhm.
while we're sleeping, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted you to touch base on was, I know you do a lot of IV and injection work,
Mhm.
and is that piece helpful for, we're just talking about nutrition, and can that be helpful from that nutrition and hormonal perspective in helping a woman in that perimenopausal phase?
Yes, 100% yes. And I utilize IV therapy and vitamin shot therapy for pretty much anybody, because when you're using nutrient therapy, you're essentially allowing for near 100% absorption, depending on
Mm-hmm.
whether it's muscle or you're putting it right into the venous system. So by the time you get to perimenopausal age, sometimes your gut is a little tired or it needs a little bit of support. And so we're not often getting the same nutrients out of the foods that we could.
Mm,
Um, and if you're coming into perimenopause from any sort of depleted state, the nutrients help you feel better faster. They help get your energy back. They help you feel more vital. They help kind of balance off that frazzled feeling. So
mm,
I will often use B vitamins to help support the adrenals, the mitochondria, energy levels. But you can also do minerals
mm-hmm.
in IV. And I see a lot of people in this age range really deficient in minerals. Minerals and
Mm-hmm.
protein.
Right.
Those are the
Yeah.
keys. And minerals we get from food. But if you're
Mm-hmm.
not eating a lot of green leafies, you're not going to be getting a lot of minerals,
Right.
unless you're like eating rocks on the side. Haha.
Right. Hopefully not, but you never
Right.
know.
So IV therapy, you can deliver nutrients, minerals in that way, and you don't even have to rely on the gut. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so,
Bypass the gut.
yep, totally bypass the gut.
Mm-hmm.
People just feel better faster, and the investment I find is really worth it, especially when you're feeling that depleted and that foggy, and
Mm-hmm.
sex hurts and you're hot flashing all the time.
Right.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
even just minor IV stuff, some B vitamins, some minerals, can be actually really, really helpful.
Wow, that's great. I'm so glad I asked you about that, because I was like, oh, I wanted for you to explain that aspect to our listeners, like the importance of the minerals in the body, because a lot of times it's hard to get it from food
Yeah.
when we're in that state,
Mhm,
like you said, in that really depleted state. It's like
mhm.
our body is the sponge, but nothing is soaking in.
Yeah,
And so the IV therapy really helps get to that next stage where then it's like you're at the lowest level you can be. And then the sponge starts to slowly absorb. And finally, then you're able to absorb the food.
yeah. And sometimes I start people there because I sit down with them and I say, I just think you're so depleted that the things that I want to do with you aren't going to work as well if we don't get some of these basics in.
Mm-hmm.
So often that will help accelerate everything, but it's often just a basic that we need to do.
Right. Building the foundation first.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
before we
so
do anything
key.
else.
Right. Because you don't want the house to fall down if we're loading it with all these other things you're not ready for.
Yeah, and a lot
hmm
of women come to me asking about bioidentical hormones and
hmm
whether that would be a good fit for them, but you can't initiate those things without a lot of those basics like nutrients. So I'm
Right.
always starting with diets and IVs and maybe a couple of supplements.
hmm Yeah. Okay, great. Good. And what other are some of the naturopathic interventions or methods that can be helpful for balancing hormones in general? Maybe like your top five for balancing in this perimenopausal phase.
Totally.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I'm a big herb fan.
hmm
Um, but before we kind of answer that question, I would say that I usually will do testing on people to
hmm
find out the root of the problem. So
Right. We didn't even
um,
talk about that.
I know, right? So before we get there,
Mhm.
let's just talk about this really quick. Testing I find to be really important because not everybody has the same issue. Some
Mm.
people are really depleted in testosterone, but their estrogen is fine.
Mhm.
Some people have estrogen that's really high in comparison to progesterone because they're not ovulating.
Mhm.
Some people are low across the board. Um, some people are having symptoms, but when we do labs, we find that their FSH, LH aren't changing. They're not
Mhm.
increasing. And those are two brain signals that will go up when someone is getting closer and closer to menopause. So that can help us rule out, oh, well, this probably isn't a hormonal thing. And that's really important.
Mhm.
Because it can be hard to determine like when does perimenopause start for me. Like I feel a little bit weird and I'm 42 and I don't know if this is perimenopause or if I have something wrong with me.
Right.
So the labs can really help us figure that out.
So key.
um,
Mhm.
yeah, so I'll do just a serum hormone test.
Mhm.
If they have a semi-regular if they have a semi-regular cycle,
Mhm.
then I will do testing on day 21.
Mhm.
They have a monthly cycle. Um, if they're all over the place, I just test it randomly because I can
Mhm.
tell based
Right.
on what their history is, what's going on with the blood work. But I'll also commonly run a Dutch test,
Mhm.
which a Dutch test is amazing. I'm sure that you have heard about it, used it, love it. It gives us a lot of info about,
Mhm.
you know, where are your hormones right now, but also what are some of the genetics behind
Mhm.
what's going on, because it looks at like COMT and methylation.
Yep.
But it also looks at an adrenal curve.
Yeah.
So it will give us an idea of, do we need to start with hormones or herbs, or do we need to work on the adrenal glands first?
Mhm.
So I do a combo of those two whenever I'm assessing somebody, and it helps me pick the right therapy for them.
Right. The route.
Helps me pick the route, yeah, because
Mhm.
say I do blood work on someone who's symptomatic and they come back and their DHEA is in the tank,
Mhm.
or testosterone is in the tank, because those are so important for how we feel as humans.
Right.
Our androgens, our male hormones, give us that sex drive, that personal drive, that motivation, that
Mhm.
like oomph to get stuff
Right.
done. And believe me, if you have all those symptoms and you're depleted and you feel like that, you need help in that area first.
Right.
So
Yes,
um,
exactly.
so for those people, I'll often do like a bioidentical hormone, whether it's actual testosterone, because
Mhm.
I'm in California, so I can prescribe testosterone, which is fantastic. Um,
Mhm.
Sometimes I'll do a DHEA liquid or
Mhm.
capsule. That
Mhm.
can be really helpful. Um, but the treatments that I pick for people really depend on, you know, what does the woman, what's her main complaint. So
Right. Individualized.
yeah, because say you have hot flashes, I might try like maca or black cohosh for
Mhm.
you. Say that you have a libido issue, it might be, you know, testosterone or some shatavari,
Right.
horny goatweed, haha.
Mhm.
I use that more with men though.
Yeah.
Um, you know, if you have hot flashes and you don't want to do anything super like high force, even just sage tea can
Mm-hmm.
be really helpful.
Yeah.
Um, but I always go back to the adrenal support in
Mm.
perimenopause,
So
and
key.
and
Mm-hmm.
electrolytes actually.
Yeah, getting those minerals in.
Yeah,
Yeah, a lot of people don't drink water
a lot of people don't drink water
or healthy water.
or healthy water.
Hmm.
A lot of people don't have the minerals to hold the water in, and
Right,
that's why they
absorb
don't
it.
drink water because they don't want to pee.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that's a conundrum, right? It's like, well, I don't want
Mhm.
to drink water because I don't want to go to the bathroom all the time. I'm like, wait, back up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We got to get you absorbing your water.
Right, so
Um,
key.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. So one thing I was going to ask you is, this is kind of silly, but you know how you have the expressions like fat, 40, and fatigued? And I was just wondering if you had a new expression, because, I feel like with hormones, we want to have the women to be empowered. So like,
Mhm.
what is that new perimenopause? I know that it's like throwing you off a
Totally.
little bit, but I was just
Yeah.
like, well, I was thinking about it myself. I'm like, well, there's got to be a new one because it puts us down as women.
Mhm.
I don't like those expressions where they're so disempowering. So anyway, if you have one, it's okay, but
Yeah.
don't feel pressured.
I mean, the only thing that really comes to mind, I don't have like a mantra that I repeat for this stage specifically, but the word that comes up for me is empowerment. Of,
Mm-hmm.
I know what you're going through, and I know why you're going through it, and I have a million different tools to fit it.
Mm.
And then I'm also going to walk you through it, and I'm going to educate you so that we can work together for 6 months to a year, and then you can have all the information you need. We have worked together closely. I've taught you stuff, so you can
Mm.
go and take that and apply that for you know the times in between that we're not working together. So
Right.
I really want to teach women how to fish versus just giving them a fish.
Totally. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. No, that's great. And empowerment is so key. So
Mhm.
key. And there are so many tools that are easy, what you talked
Yeah.
about today too, like stress management can be easy when you have the tools in the toolbox. You just have to learn how to, you have the key to open it up. And working with someone like you, it's like, then you're so empowered to go down the road, have the tools and be able to help yourself. And help others too. That's how we learn from
Mhm.
helping ourselves and helping others, which makes our community so fabulous as women.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
having other women that support you too during this time. Like
Right.
talk to your girlfriends about what you're
Hmm.
going through so you don't feel alone about it.
Do you do any type of group work with that specific age group, like the perimenopausal group?
It's funny that you mention it. I will be in the future, uh,
Hmm.
in the baby stages of putting some things in the works,
Oh,
uh,
great.
because I feel like what happens a lot in my practice, and I'm sure you can relate to this, is that people come to you, but sometimes cost can be a barrier.
Mm.
And I personally hate that. Like, I just wish
Hmm.
that every woman ever could always have a naturopath in their back pocket. But
Hmm.
that just doesn't pan out because we have businesses and loans, so we have to charge appropriately. But
Right.
uh, I'm going to be creating a place where women can come for uh, you know kind of like a membership program where
Hmm.
they can get their questions answered, and it's not a doctor patient relationship per se, but
Hmm.
they can get that info that they need for a much more affordable rate.
Oh,
So I
great.
am
Well,
working on
we'll look
something.
at, yeah, we'll keep our eye on you for that.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
sounds great. There's a book, I can't remember the name of it right now, but I'll send it to you later. It's like
Sure.
the group of eight or something.
Hmm.
I can't think of the title, but it's a woman and she did a study of doing healing with groups of eight and how empowering like that specific number is. So I'll send it to you, and listeners, I'll put it in the notes too.
Mhm.
But it was really empowering to hear, like when you're working with someone solo, you're
Mhm.
healing, but then when you're in this group of people who are also having the same like goal of healing, it like manifests into this massive amount of healing. So that's really interesting. I find, I love group healing. Okay, so let's talk for a few minutes about PCOS, if we could, just quickly, because I wanted to just touch base on this for you and hear your thoughts about it, because I know a lot of women are diagnosed with it and suffer from it. And I wanted to hear just a few tidbits from you about your thoughts about it.
Yes. So, the first thing that really comes to mind is I find that PCOS is really a really poor name for the condition. So PCOS stands for polycystic ovarian syndrome. So this idea that your ovaries have cysts, too many of them, and it affects their function. But this is kind of an outdated way to think about it, because there's 3 criteria that you need to be diagnosed with PCOS, and not all women have them. And it's things like irregular cycles, hirsutism, which is growth of hair in places where it doesn't typically grow on women, and then the polycystic ovaries. And so I find the issue that I have with PCOS is that it's one of those catch-alls like IBS, where a lot of practitioners will work up a woman in some form or fashion, and they really just don't know what to do with her because she's hormonal and complaining about things that they just don't want to deal with. And so they'll say things like, you have PCOS. But often I find that it's not the right diagnosis for somebody, or they should have been diagnosed with something else. Like, they should have been diagnosed with blood sugar issues, and that should have been treated.
Yeah.
Or like they don't meet all of the criteria, and so they walk around with this label for a really long time, and they don't really know how to address it. And then by the time I run the right labs and do an appropriate workup with their history, the more I see, okay, well, that's not really what you have. You have like a bunch of different things going on, and they're all playing a role, and it's making it look like you have PCOS, but you don't really.
Right. So
But
interesting.
yeah. Oh, I get fired up about this. Feel free to cut me off. But
no, it's all good.
yeah, the other thing is that I think a lot of women, once they get that diagnosis, it tends to be a crutch for them.
Right, because they've been labeled.
Yeah, because they've been labeled, and there's not a lot of good info on PCOS, how to heal it naturally, like out there on the internet, that's actually going to be useful for them. And so they have this idea, oh, I have PCOS, so I'm always going to be overweight, or oh, I have PCOS, so it's going to be really hard for me to be fertile and have a baby, or oh, I have PCOS, so I'll never be able to go off of hormonal birth control, or I'll never be able to do the fertility awareness method for birth control, whatever their goals are. And I find that to be completely not true.
Yeah. And not fair for the women, for sure.
It's so not fair. And so sometimes I do, work with someone that legit does have PCOS. But even as I'm saying those words, I'm trying to think back in my mind with all the patients I've worked with. And it has been maybe one person out of all of the women that I've worked with that have hormonal issues that was, actually met all the criteria, was technically PCOS. Women don't fit the mold, but that's the label that they're given. And so they don't ever get anywhere with treatment because they're given metformin, which helps with blood sugar and is but they don't have a insulin issue PCOS. They don't have a blood sugar issue PCOS. So they might have an androgen, high testosterone, high DHEA, adrenal issue PCOS.
Right.
They're given metformin, and then the metformin drug can be harsh on the gut, and then that creates a whole other list of problems.
Right. So, down the road and not good.
Yeah. So I just really wish that women would be more vocal and really fight for answers. And I feel like that shift is starting to happen, but like, I just can't tell you how many times I sit down with someone and I'm like, oh, this is what we need to do. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, let's do this for 6 months. You'll be so much better.
Right. You'll feel
And
better.
then, yeah. And then the PCOS goes away.
Right.
You know, like PCOS is this, it's kind of like a metabolic disorder in a
Mm,
way.
yeah, that totally makes
Depending
sense.
on,
Hmm.
yeah, depending on the source. So if we can go back and fix the source, then poof, no more PCOS.
Right.
So yeah, so I think about it the same way as most naturopaths think of IBS. Uh,
Hmm.
it needs a new name
Right.
and it's a little catch-all. So
Hmm.
if we had to name it right now, I would just call it ovarian dysfunction.
Right. Something has gone
Yeah,
awry in the ovarian
right.
or the ovaries.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it sounds like what you're recommending is, if listeners, if you have gotten that
Mhm.
PCOS diagnosis, maybe you should seek out a naturopathic physician or a health practitioner and investigate that diagnosis a little bit more and make sure that it's right on. And there are a lot of things that we can help with from that alternative perspective. And the MD or the conventional model doesn't have those tools for a lot of hormonal issues, I should say. I don't like that
Yeah,
word, but you know what I mean.
totally. Hmm.
Yeah, dysfunctions is better, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, and we have the toolbox.
Have the toolbox.
We have lots of
Yeah.
tools in the toolbox. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Um,
that's the thing about the toolbox is that if we try something for you that we think would be a good fit and it ends up not really working for you, we have something else. But that
mhm.
idea is really foreign in the conventional workup and mindset. You know, they're always pretty much like, oh, well, we'll do this. And if that doesn't work, then we can't help you. But
Right.
that's not the case with naturopathic medicine.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, and I think that's one of the main reasons why people, listeners, are seeking out an alternative route, because they've been given that exact message from their provider. Like, well, try this. It didn't work. And I'm sorry, I don't know what else to do. When we have so many things, and getting to the root, I think you mentioned earlier too, like really figuring out what's going on, being that personal detective for our patients is so key, and we are really thorough. We will go
Exactly.
into the earth to figure things out.
I know. I always tell patients like, yeah, let's run the lab, and they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, I'll run the lab work for you. They're like, are you kidding? Yeah, why not? It's great information about your body. And then they just look at me like, wow, I had to, practically pull out all of my doctor's hair to get them to run something like this.
Right.
And I'm just like, yeah, let's run the
Let's do
lab.
it.
Let's
Yeah,
bring
I know it's interesting. I hear that a lot from patients too. It's like, well, my doctor won't do the labs. Like, well,
it
let's do them. We need to
Yeah.
find out what's going on in there. And pay, sometimes if you have to pay out of pocket for a lab, just on a side note, they're
Mhm.
really not that expensive. There are some labs that can be really expensive, but basic labs are not. And so, sometimes it's actually cheaper to pay out of pocket than to go through your insurance, just as a side note on labs. So always check with your provider, your naturopathic physician, or your PCP about labs to find out first from your insurance.
Yeah.
Okay, we went on a little side note there. One last one last question. Um,
Sure.
if you had an unlimited budget, what would you do to have the biggest impacts at health and welfare of the planet?
Wow. That is such a good question. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things I could pick, to be honest.
You're like, I
I
don't know.
think,
There's so many.
right? Oh man. I mean, I feel like one thing that I would fix, and I feel like this would fix America, but probably other countries too, is just reform the way that we have the medical model for
Mm,
how patients are seen and treated and hospitalized, and
mm-hmm,
just change the whole model and start with prevention first.
mm-hmm,
Because like I'm sending, just a little quick segue, I send a lot of my patients that have gastro issues, stomach issues,
mm-hmm,
to the gastroenterologist,
mm-hmm.
make sure that structure is okay before we start working on function. And it's amazing to me, all of the complaints they have. Same thing with women that have hormonal issues. The patient has so many different complaints, and the doctor just says, oh, here, take this anti anti-diarrheal drug, or just take this birth
Proton
control
pump
pill.
inhibitor or something.
Yeah, proton pump inhibitor, take this birth control pill, take this metformin. Like with diabetes, don't, like, God forbid, talk about diet. Let's just use
And
insulin.
exercise.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, it blows my mind that we've gotten to this place where basic things are not recommended. And it's really saddening to me, because I'm a personality that tends to be very, very logical and very, very upfront. And I can see and sense different things. So it's very annoying for me to just see a model that's not working. Because if I was in charge, let's just throw away the model and start over.
Dr. Meg for president.
Totally, I know. But yeah, that's probably what I would pick, because, say we change the medical model for the world, and how many diseases, especially chronic diseases that shouldn't exist, can we eradicate?
Right. Like global healthcare. What an interesting concept and idea, right? Like where we just move into this whole global form of healthcare. Yeah, I would totally support that.
Right. Like, why don't we partner with all of these countries that don't have good healthcare and get them up and running? And, we don't have to have like a global healthcare, but like each, like, we should make a model that every country should, it should work for their system. It should work for the people. Whereas, with our medical system here in America, it's a lot better than some other countries. So I don't want to knock it fully. However, it's not really for people that are well and people that are sick. It's for the insurance companies and politicians and, people that are making money. And it should be,
it's not for prevention.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need a prevention model for sure. Like, like you said, that would really change our whole model of healthcare. And that's what we're about, is helping prevent things from happening further down the road. Be better in the moment.
Exactly.
Oh, well, thanks, Dr. Meg. It's been such a joy to have you on the show today. And just one last thing, what are some of the best ways for people to follow you, find out, like, you have a YouTube station and your Instagram is just fabulous with IGTV, and tell us a little bit about those things.
Yeah, so I go by Dr. Meg in practice a lot, Dr. Meg ND, so DRMEGND.
Super easy.
Super easy.
Yeah.
So if you can remember that, then you can pretty much find me anywhere. You can find me on YouTube, you can find me on Facebook, you can find me on Instagram, which is probably the platform I'm the most active on. You can find me on Twitter. You can find my website, drmegnd.com. So if you know my name, you have no excuse. You can talk. You can find me.
Easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, great, good. Well, I've been I learned so much about hormones today in the different stages, and I'm so excited for our listeners to learn and to find you. And your website is how they can make an appointment with you as well, right? And you're seeing patients just virtually, or you're seeing both right now?
Yes. So I'm licensed in California, and I have an in-person practice and a virtual one. So if you're in California, I can help you. I do sometimes do out of state, just educational consultations. But mostly I will see people in person in San Diego, or virtually, doesn't matter. I mean, I love seeing you in person, but yeah, you can totally pick up the phone and talk to me. And everything is online and virtual. So all you need to do is click the button. Easy peasy.
Easy. Okay, great, good. Well, thank you so much. And we'll look forward to learning more about your groups at our next podcast.
Ooh, sounds great.
Okay, bye-bye.